Hey everyone! Tonight we're kicking things off with the extraordinary lives and scandalous bedrooms of medieval queens. Women who were redefining controversy centuries before tabloids existed. Before you get too comfortable, take a second to smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what I bring to the table. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see our global audience tuning in from across the world. Now let's set the mood, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for some ambient background noise, and settle in for tonight's historical journey together. Joanna of Naples took the throne in 1343 and immediately decided royal protocol was more like loose guidelines than actual rules. Where others saw rigid tradition, she saw golden opportunities. And where others were content with one husband, she thought, why stop there? She went through 4 marriages, which honestly wasn't that unusual for medieval nobility. Except Joanna developed a suspicious habit of outliving her spouses, sometimes at alarmingly accelerated rates. Her first husband, Andrew of Hungary, didn't even make it through year 1. He was discovered hanging from a window in what was officially deemed an unfortunate accident. Unofficially, people had questions. Joanna? She had none. Now here's the legend that really cemented Joanna's notorious reputation. They say she had a trapdoor installed beneath her royal bed, or rather, final solution for ending dates when words failed. After a night of royal intimacy, the floor would allegedly give way, sending her unfortunate partner tumbling straight into the castle moat. Efficient? Absolutely. Dramatic? Without question. Probably completely fabricated by some bitter ex? Most likely, but the story stuck because it perfectly matched her vibe. Joanna ruled Naples with both elegance and theatrical flair. She wasn't reckless, just highly selective. Some called her charming, others called her dangerous. A few called her both while slowly backing toward the nearest exit. She held her own through wars, papal condemnations, political rivals, and more bedroom scandals than you could count. Through it all, she wore her crown like she wore her reputation, boldly and without apology. By the time she died, allegedly strangled, possibly by one of her many enemies or allies. Honestly, it's hard to keep track. Joanna had left behind a legacy of drama, power, and enough juicy gossip to fuel Italian ballads for centuries. Joanna of Naples wasn't just a queen. She was a headline before headlines even existed. Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't just live through the 12th century, she owned it. Queen of France first, then Queen of England, and mother to 2 future kings. Eleanor didn't just play the Game of Thrones. She flipped the board, drank the wine, and wrote a sonnet about the whole affair. She married Louis VII of France at 15. He was deeply religious, painfully awkward, and gave off strong. Married his cousin because he had no other hobbies, energy. Eleanor? She was witty, wealthy, and had the attention span of a caffeinated falcon. The marriage worked about as well as you'd expect. Louis dragged her on the Second Crusade to the Holy Land, which sounds romantic until you're marching through deserts in full armor, watching your husband cry over religious relics. Eleanor brought fine clothes, musicians, and possibly developed a soft spot for her handsome uncle, the Prince of Antioch. When rumors started swirling, Louis just frowned harder. The marriage quietly died over some cold leftovers in Damascus. After the annulment, Eleanor practically sprinted back to Aquitaine and immediately remarried, this time to Henry Plantagenet, the future King of England. He was 11 years younger, fiery red-haired, and wildly unpredictable. In other words, exactly her type. Their marriage produced 10 children, multiple wars, and one of history's most passive-aggressive royal households. But Eleanor wasn't just birthing future monarchs. She was hosting poetry contests. At her court in Poitiers, she championed courtly love, a new concept encouraging noble ladies to be adored from afar by hopeless knights with emotional baggage and good cheekbones. Of course, no one actually followed the from afar part. It was all stolen glances, lute serenades, and long walks that mysteriously ended behind tapestries. Eleanor's court became the destination for nobles with more passion than impulse control. When Henry's wandering eye grew tired of monogamy and of Eleanor, she responded the way any good mother would, by helping their son stage a full-scale rebellion against him. He was not amused. She spent 16 years under castle arrest, which for Eleanor just meant more time to write letters, sip wine, and plot vengeance through her children. Margaret of Burgundy wasn't the queen you'd expect to spark a national scandal. On paper, she checked all the right boxes. Royal bloodline, properly married to the French heir, looked stunning in fur-trimmed gowns, and never openly poisoned anyone at court dinners. The perfect medieval wife, until 1314, when France discovered that leaving 3 princesses bored and unsupervised in a castle was a recipe for gossip, embroidery, and extracurricular activities. Margaret was married to Louis, future Louis X, a man whose charisma was often compared to day-old porridge. Their marriage wasn't exactly thrilling, and Margaret apparently grew tired of reading psalms and pretending Louis's bedtime stories about tax reform were seductive. Enter the Tour de Nesle affair, a scandal with a name so dramatic it sounds like a medieval soap opera. According to accounts, Margaret and her sister-in-law Blanche started secretly meeting 2 handsome Norman knights in the Tour de Nesle, a royal tower by the Seine that was conveniently private, slightly haunted, and apparently soundproof enough for both courtly whispers and less than courtly behavior. The men were eventually caught because, and this is historical fact, they were recognized by the pattern on their pillowcases. Royal servants noticed the knights had luxury linens identical to those used in the princesses' chambers. That's right, the downfall of a queen came down to medieval pillow theft. No espionage, no poison, just terrible laundry decisions. King Philip IV, Margaret's father-in-law, was not amused. The knights were publicly tortured and executed with dramatic flair. As for Margaret, she was thrown into Chateau Gallard prison, a place about as cheerful as its name suggests. She died there 2 years later, whether from illness, suffocation, or because her husband wanted a clean slate before becoming king. History remains conveniently vague. Medieval records are suspiciously silent about whether the pillowcases were ever returned. Margaret's crime wasn't politics, witchcraft, or treason. It was being a little too charming in the wrong tower with the wrong men on the wrong linens. And in medieval France, that was enough to get you erased from history. Isabella of France had everything a medieval queen could want: royal blood, a crown, expensive French shoes, and a husband she absolutely despised. She married Edward II of England in 1308. He was tall, handsome, and significantly more emotionally available to his male favorites than to his wife, which in a royal marriage created complications. From the start, Isabella had competition. Edward was already deeply attached to Piers Gaveston, a charming knight with great fashion sense and the political tact of a drunk peacock. Edward showered him with titles, lands, and the kind of attention most wives worked years to earn. At their coronation banquet, Gaveston wore more jewels than Isabella. She noticed. Gaveston was eventually exiled, recalled, exiled again, and then beheaded by nobles who were deeply unimpressed with his eyeliner and general smugness. Isabella may have shed a royal tear, or not, but just when you thought the marital drama peaked, Edward replaced Gaveston with Hugh Despenser, a man so greedy and unpopular he made Gaveston look like a picnic. Despenser wasn't just in the king's bedchamber. He was in the treasury, the council, and every noble's worst nightmares. He exiled Isabella's allies, seized her lands, and publicly humiliated her. Bold strategy. Insulting the queen has historically never ended well. By 1326, Isabella had enough. She took her son, the future Edward III, and fled to France under the guise of diplomacy. There she met Roger Mortimer, a rebellious nobleman with a strong jawline and very available marital status. Together, they launched a full-scale invasion of England. Yes, really, a queen invaded her own country with her boyfriend and teenage son in tow. And it worked. Edward was captured and deposed. Then the rumors started. Edward II died in prison under mysterious circumstances. One particularly graphic rumor suggests a red-hot poker was involved. Most historians now consider that an exaggeration, But Isabella's hands weren't exactly clean. She ruled England as regent for years, sharing power and probably blankets with Mortimer until her son grew tired of watching and overthrew them both. Isabella was sent to comfortable retirement because even rebellious queens need a break sometimes. She entered as a wife. She left as a legend. Agnes of Navarre was born into a world of poetry, politics, and passive-aggressive dynasties. As the daughter of a king and sister to a troubadour queen, she grew up surrounded by sharp words, sharper alliances, and the understanding that a well-placed romantic affair could fix almost anything or ruin everything. She became Queen of Aragon through marriage to King James II grandson, which sounds impressive until you realize her new husband, James IV, was already halfway to madness, and not the fun, artistic kind. More like the wakes up screaming and accuses the curtains of treason variety. Agnes responded to this situation the way any self-respecting medieval noblewoman with limited options would, by discreetly redirecting her affections elsewhere. Quietly, repeatedly, and with an apparent eye for variety. Her list of alleged lovers included knights, courtiers, musicians, and possibly a monk who was spectacularly bad at keeping his vows. She was charming, cultured, and fluent in the language of flirtation, which in the Aragonese court was more valuable than knowing Latin, and probably more dangerous too. Of course, secrets don't stay secret long in castles with stone walls and bored servants. Rumors began swirling until her love life became more popular than scripture. Now to be clear, Agnes never got officially caught. No public trial, no forced confession, but people did start dying around her. Quietly, conveniently. A rival here, a gossipy maid there, one unfortunate courtier who apparently tripped into a very full moat. Was she behind it? History remains coy, but the kitchen staff reportedly started locking the spice cabinets when she walked by, just in case. Eventually her husband died, shockingly not by her hand, and Agnes retired to a convent. Not out of guilt, mind you, just tradition. Convents were where noble women went to read, pray, and quietly outlive their scandals. She never remarried, possibly because no one was brave enough to ask, or because she finally found peace among nuns who didn't ask nosy questions. Agnes of Navarre left behind no heirs, just whispers in court corridors, rumors and love poems that ended too abruptly, and a warning wrapped in every courtly romance. Joanna of Castile was a princess by birth, a queen by title, and a walking cautionary tale about getting too emotionally attached to your spouse. She married Philip the Handsome of Burgundy, and yes, that was his actual nickname. He was considered the medieval equivalent of a heartthrob with flowing blonde hair, impressive calves, and the kind of smirk that suggested he'd never washed a dish in his life. Joanna, for all her royal training, fell hard. Their marriage was passionate, until it wasn't. Philip was charming, ambitious, and allergic to monogamy. He cheated constantly, subtly at first, then with the reckless abandon of a poorly written romance novel protagonist. Joanna, not one to take betrayal lightly, responded with fits of rage, interrogations, and according to some sources, several attempts at hair-pulling diplomacy. Then things took a dark turn when Philip suddenly dropped dead in 1506, allegedly from drinking cold water after a ball game. Even for the 16th century, this explanation was suspiciously vague. Joanna was devastated, not the dignified black veil and move on kind of grief, but the dig up the body and carry it around variety, which she did, for months. She ordered the coffin reopened repeatedly to ensure no one had stolen his corpse. She kissed his dead lips. She refused to let any women near the body in case they got ideas. Apparently, even in death, Philip was considered a flight risk. Joanna traveled across Castile with the coffin, stopping at monasteries, insisting on sleeping beside it. Some chroniclers suggest she may have slept with it. The records get conveniently vague at this point. Whether out of respect or sheer discomfort is unclear. People started whispering. Courtiers panicked. Her father Ferdinand eventually declared her insane and locked her in a convent for the next 46 years, a record even among emotionally intense queens. Was Joanna truly mad, or just a grief-stricken woman clinging too tightly to the man who'd broken her heart? Historians still debate it. But either way, she remains one of the few medieval queens remembered more for her post-mortem romance than anything she did with the living. First things first, no, Catherine the Great did not die while attempting intimacy with a horse. But the fact we even have to clarify this tells you everything about how wild her reputation became once she'd annoyed enough powerful men. Technically outside our medieval time frame, Catherine earns her place here through sheer scandal density alone. Born a minor German princess, she married into Russian royalty and quickly realized her husband Peter III was less a czar and more a grown child playing with military toys who had a concerning Prussia obsession. He preferred playing soldier to ruling an empire, or frankly, spending time with his wife. So Catherine, like any ambitious woman in an ice-cold marriage, looked elsewhere. She took lovers, many lovers, officers, nobles, poets, possibly a furniture maker. Some were younger, some terrifyingly competent. One was 18 when she was 60, which says less about scandal and more about motivation if you think about it. But Catherine wasn't reckless. She was calculating. She rewarded her lovers with estates and titles, a royal loyalty program. Impress the empress? Land and pension. Fail to impress? There's always exile. Now about that rumor. After her death, malicious enemies, or very bored aristocrats, spread the story that Catherine died attempting intimate relations with a horse. The rumor was so anatomically implausible it should have died immediately. It didn't. Why? Because Catherine was a powerful woman who ruled without a man. She enacted reforms, crushed rebellions, and told the church to mind its own business. So naturally, the only way people could handle that was to invent a story involving livestock and questionable architecture. In reality, she died of a stroke in bed, fully clothed, no livestock present. But the damage was done. The myth lived on because people preferred scandal to truth. Catherine, already scandalous enough in life, became legendary in death. She may not have slept with a horse, but she absolutely rode history like she owned it. If you thought medieval queens just sat around embroidering and sighing by candlelight, allow me to introduce Fredegund of Neustria, a woman who believed strongly in marital duty, royal dignity, and stabbing her enemies in the neck. Born a servant, Fredegund rose through the ranks with efficiency that usually requires either extreme charisma or a body count. In her case, it was both. She caught the eye of King Chilperic I of Neustria, a Frankish king who already had a wife, but not for long. His first queen mysteriously died shortly after Fredegund entered the picture. Shocking. The second wife, Galswintha, was found strangled in her bed not long after marrying Chilperic. Fredegund, by then firmly in the king's favor, denied involvement with that classic, "I may be holding a pillow, but that proves nothing" tone. Once married to Chilperic herself, Fredegund didn't calm down. She escalated. Dramatically, she was known for keeping a knife under her pillow, not symbolically, but literally. This was a woman who treated bedtime like a potential crime scene. Political rival poisoned? Check. Bishop says something rude. Disappears mysteriously. Servant gets too gossipy. Oops, dead again. Her feud with Brunhilde of Austrasia, her sister-in-law, became legendary. The two women spent decades waging what amounted to a royal mean girls' war, but with more assassinations. Fredegund once sent a hired killer to murder Brunhilde's son during Mass. Subtlety was not her strong suit. Even after her husband's own suspicious assassination, Fredegund ruled as regent for her son Clothar II. She handled diplomacy, crushed rebellions, and probably stabbed at least one more person during a dinner party. She wasn't just feared, she was respected, mostly out of fear. And somehow, she died peacefully in bed, which feels like a historical oversight. Fredegund didn't just sleep with knives. She was the knife. Sharp, cold, and always ready. She makes most other queens on this list look like they were playing with wooden spoons. And Bullen wasn't born to be queen. She was born to be noticed. Sharp-witted, stylish, and fluent in the delicate art of eyebrow-based warfare. She knew how to command attention in a room full of powdered men who thought quoting Latin made them irresistible. She arrived at the English court in the early 1500s like a fashionable storm. Not conventionally beautiful by some accounts, but magnetic in that "I'm smarter than you and I know it" kind of way. King Henry VIII took one look at her and promptly forgot he already had a wife. Unfortunately for Catherine of Aragon, and wasn't interested in being just another mistress. She aimed higher, crown level higher. Henry pursued her for years, writing love letters that read like a mix of obsession and teenage diary entries, and tore England in half just to marry her, literally. He created the Church of England so he could annul his marriage and slide a ring onto Anne's very ambitious finger. That's not romance, that's state-sponsored seduction. Once queen, Anne Boleyn didn't settle for sitting quietly and popping out airs. She was sharp-tongued, opinionated, and openly disliked by half the court, mostly because she said what she thought and didn't feign at flattery. She also had a habit of teasing Henry in public, bold, considering his track record with wives. Then came the problem: no son, just one daughter, Elizabeth, who'd later rule England like a boss. But at the time, she was a major disappointment to a king obsessed with male heirs. Suddenly, Anne's wit wasn't charming anymore. Rumors started, affairs with courtiers, incest with her brother, witchcraft, adultery. Most of it was absurd, even by Tudor standards. But Henry was bored and looking for an exit, preferably one with a blade. She was arrested, given a trial that would have made a kangaroo court blush, and executed by a French swordsman, imported for class. Because if you're going to murder your wife, at least be fancy about it. And Boleyn lost her head, but not her legacy. She remains the queen who played the long game, won the throne, and lost everything. All because she dared to say no before she said yes. Some queens rose through scandal, some through seduction. And then there's Christina of Denmark, who rose through self-preservation and the ability to deliver a verbal slap without smudging her lipstick. Born into Danish royalty in 1521, she was married off young, standard procedure for 16th century princesses who were basically walking diplomatic treaties in velvet gowns. Her husband, the Duke of Milan, died shortly after, leaving Christina a widow at 16, which, for a noblewoman, was kind of the dream. Wealth, independence, and nobody trying to explain tax reforms over dinner. Enter Henry VIII, recently single, and Boleyn had just lost her head, impatient, and already one wife down. Naturally, he sent a portrait painter to capture Christina's likeness and assess her suitability. Christina, being politically savvy and not eager to become wife number 3, or corpse number 3, looked at the proposal and famously replied, "If I had 2 heads, I would happily place one at the disposal of the King of England." That's not just a rejection, that's a roast carved into marble. Henry was reportedly not amused. He still pursued her, because nothing says romance like ignoring a diplomatic insult. But Christina remained firmly unenthusiastic, possibly because she enjoyed breathing. Instead of risking the English throne and possible execution, she married a duke who didn't behead people over breakfast. She lived comfortably, ruled wisely, and kept her neck attached, which, historically speaking, is a win. Maria of Portugal started her royal journey like many noble women. Reluctantly married to a man twice her age, expected to smile politely, and ideally produce an heir without asking too many questions. She married Alfonso XI of Castile, a king with battlefield glory, an ego the size of Toledo, and a mistress he openly preferred. Not discreetly, he flaunted his lover, Leonor de Guzman, like a trophy wife with a better backstory. Maria? Less than thrilled. She gave him a legitimate heir, the future Peter the Cruel, while Leonor gave him 10 illegitimate ones, along with most of the royal affection, perks, and real estate. After Alfonso's death, Maria finally got her moment. She returned to Portugal with her teenage son, Peter, and did what any bitter, sidelined queen might. Clung to her boy like he was both emotional support and revenge strategy. Historians politely call it overprotective. The less polite ones raise eyebrows at the strange intensity of their relationship. Peter grew up, fell in love, and married his longtime mistress, Inés de Castro. Maria did not approve. Some say it was because Inés was lower nobility. Others whisper it was because she didn't want to share Peter with any woman who wasn't her. Either way, things escalated. According to one dramatic version, Maria encouraged Inés's assassination. Peter, after Inés was murdered, responded by declaring her his posthumous queen, digging up her body, placing it on the throne, and forcing nobles to kiss her decaying hand. You know, a completely measured royal response. Did Maria actually mastermind the killing? Maybe, maybe not. But her name was definitely whispered behind palace curtains for years. Later in life, she withdrew from politics and may have started referring to herself as Empress in private. There's no proof she went fully mad, but she did spend a lot of time staring out windows and writing letters no one read. Maria of Portugal never got the love she wanted, but she got a lifetime of palace intrigue, gossip, and the dubious honor of being remembered as the mother-in-law from medieval hell. Olga of Kiev was not a woman to cross lightly at all, or even look at funny. When her husband, Prince Igor, was murdered by a neighboring tribe called the Drevlians in 945, they made a critical mistake. They assumed his widow would quietly mourn and then accept a marriage proposal from their prince. As if the woman whose husband they'd just tied to trees and ripped in half would be in the mood for wedding cake. Olga smiled, nodded politely, and told them she'd consider it. Then she burned them all. First, she invited the Drevlian envoys to her court. While they relaxed in their boats, she had them carried, boats and all, into a massive pit and buried alive. Strong opening move. Then she sent word for more noble suitors. When those arrived, she offered them a bathhouse to freshen up. Once they were inside, she locked the doors and set the place on fire. Still not done, she traveled to the Drevlian capital, asking for a funeral feast in her husband's honor. They threw a massive party. She got them drunk. Then her soldiers slaughtered about 5,000 of them. It was less a feast and more a blood-spattered TED Talk on why you don't mess with widows from Kiev. But the piece de resistance? The birds. When the Drevlians finally begged for mercy, Olga said she'd stop the siege if each household gave her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. Reasonable, they thought. Humane, even. Olga then tied sulfur-soaked cloth to each bird's leg, lit them on fire, and released them. The birds flew home, into barns, thatched roofs, and wooden houses. The entire city burned down in a synchronized firestorm. All brought to you by Team Avenge Igor. Olga eventually converted to Christianity and is now a canonized saint, proving that even history has a sense of humor. One minute you're burning cities with pigeons, the next you're a holy symbol of piety. Olga didn't flirt, poison, or plot in whispers. She just annihilated. And somehow, she still made the sainthood list. Lucrezia Borgia never technically wore a queen's crown, but don't let that fool you. She ruled hearts, bedrooms, and suspiciously timed deaths with more flair than most monarchs could manage with a full treasury and standing army. Born in 1480 to the Borgia family, already a red flag, Lucrezia was the daughter of Pope Alexander VI. Yes, the Pope. You'd think a celibate man of God wouldn't have children, but the Borgias operated under their own interpretation of scripture, mostly involving nepotism and Renaissance-level thirst. Lucrezia was married off several times as part of political alliances. Husbands tended to either die suddenly, flee in fear, or find themselves in awkward situations involving mysterious circumstances. One poor soul, Giovanni Sforza, claimed he was pressured to annul their marriage due to non-consummation. In other words, the family publicly declared he was too boring in bed for Lucrezia's standards. Subtle, they were not. Then there were the rumors. Oh, the rumors. That she wore a hollow ring filled with poison. That she had an affair with her brother Cesare. That she gave birth to a child whose parentage was listed as unknown. Possibly even the Pope himself. Medieval gossip didn't dabble in subtle implications. It sprinted straight into full-blown soap opera territory. Was any of it true? Probably not. But that didn't stop the whispers. Lucrezia was beautiful, intelligent, fluent in multiple languages, and knew how to throw a party, which in 15th century Rome meant orgies, politics, and maybe a little light homicide for flavor. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Lucrezia later settled into a quieter life as Duchess of Ferrara. She ran a successful court, supported the arts, and spent more time reading poetry than plotting murders. It's almost disappointing, like watching a lion take up gardening. But the legend of Lucrezia never died. The Borgia name still drips with scandal, and she remains its most glamorous ghost, equal parts reality and very well-dressed myth. In the end, Lucrezia's greatest weapon wasn't poison or seduction, it was ambiguity. And history, as always, ate it up. Wu Zetian began her imperial career the traditional way, as a teenage concubine to Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty. She was one of many, pretty, polite, and quietly observant. She also played the long game like it was a board sport with no rulebook. When the emperor died, Wu, like all childless concubines, was sent to a Buddhist convent to live out her days in quiet reflection. Wu reflected, then plotted, then re-emerged. She somehow caught the eye of the next emperor, Taizong's son, Gaozong. Yes, she seduced her former stepson. Yes, that's exactly as awkward as it sounds. She returned to court, this time with upgraded ambitions and significantly fewer illusions about loyalty. Once she became empress, Wu began clearing the imperial court like it was spring cleaning with execution warrants. Rivals removed, political threats exiled, framed, or turned into cautionary tales. Even her own children weren't safe. She was rumored to have smothered her infant daughter just to frame the previous empress. That might sound extreme, but Wu didn't dabble in subtlety. She preferred results. Eventually, when Emperor Gaozong fell ill, Wu ruled through him, around him, and in spite of him. After his death, she made her next bold move, becoming the first and only woman to declare herself Emperor of China in her own right. She didn't rule from behind a veil or through a regent. She sat on the throne, wore the robes, and signed the decrees. The Confucian scholars had a collective breakdown. Wu did not care. Under her reign, the empire thrived, agriculture improved, education expanded, the civil service grew. But so did the number of accidental deaths at court and mysteriously silent dissenters. And yes, the rumors followed: secret lovers, sexual manipulation, murder by golden box, orgies in the palace. You name it, someone accused her of it. Wu ignored them all. She died in her 80s. Rare for an empress. Rarer still for a woman who ruled directly for over 40 years and made it look easy. Queen Tamar of Georgia ruled during what historians call the Georgian Golden Age. But if you believe the court poets, it was also a time of spiritual enlightenment, epic war victories, and extremely poetic pillow talk. Crowned King of Kings, yes, King, in 1184, Tamar wasn't content with being a queen in name only. She styled herself as the sovereign ruler, not just the royal accessory to her husband. And when her nobles tried to saddle her with a politically safe marriage, she politely chose a drunken Russian prince with questionable hygiene, married him, then promptly exiled him when he misbehaved, which he did. A lot. After that, Tamar ruled solo. Georgia expanded its territory, flourished economically, and produced so much court poetry it could have flooded the Black Sea with verses about love, loyalty, and the divine glow of our glorious queen's cheekbones. Now here's where things get interesting, and just a little bit spicy. Tamar's court poets, particularly Shota Rustaveli, wrote epic romances so passionately devoted to her that modern scholars have raised eyebrows. His The Knight in the Panther's Skin tells of a queen who rules all men, inspires blind devotion, and may or may not resemble Tamar with slightly more metaphor. Of course, none of this proves anything, but rumors do linger that Tamar may have enjoyed more than just literary admiration from the men, and possibly women, at her court. Despite the flirtations of history, Tamar was canonized as a saint after her death, which is impressive considering her reign included leading crusades, crushing rebellions, and allegedly sending ex-lovers off to monasteries for spiritual reflection. She died peacefully, surrounded by loyal nobles, and enough theological justification to make even the most poetic rumors fade quietly into myth. Tamar didn't need scandal to be remembered, but the possibility of one? That's what keeps her fascinating. If you think Christmas ends on December 25th, you'd be laughed out of a medieval tavern. Back then, the real party was only just beginning. In the Middle Ages, Christmas wasn't a single day of presents and food comas. It was a full 12-day extravaganza stretching from December 25th, the Nativity, to January 6th, Epiphany. And each of those days had its own traditions, feasts, and excuses for indulgence that would make modern holiday planners blush. The first day, Christmas proper, was solemn and sacred, at least until the church services ended. After weeks of Advent fasting, medieval Lent with fewer snacks, Christmas unleashed a tidal wave of feasting, music, and merrymaking. The poor finally got to eat meat. The rich threw banquets that could bankrupt a small duchy. Ale flowed like the Thames after a storm. But this was just the opening act. December 26th was St. Stephen's Day, when people remembered the first Christian martyr by giving food to the poor. Think of it as Proto-Boxing Day, but with more piety and fewer shopping returns. December 28th was Holy Innocents' Day, commemorating the children slain by Herod. In a darkly ironic twist, some traditions let children rule households for the day, a recipe for chaos that probably made Herod seem slightly less terrible by comparison. By January 1st, the Feast of the Circumcision, yes, really, everyone was too full, too drunk, and too exhausted to do much beyond groan through another Latin hymn and reach for another roasted swan leg. But they persevered until January 6th, Epiphany, when the 12 days culminated in masked balls, role reversals, and the kind of revelry that made priests clutch their rosaries in horror. For medieval folks, Christmas wasn't just a holiday. It was a carefully choreographed dance between sacred devotion and rowdy excess, where social hierarchies flipped like pancakes on a griddle. If you weren't still partying well into the new year, frankly, you weren't celebrating right. Forget tinsel and plastic Santas. A medieval Christmas looked more like a pagan woodland rave than a cozy Hallmark special. Instead of store-bought decorations, they used nature's bounty: ivy, holly, bay leaves, and mistletoe, all evergreen plants symbolizing eternal life, borrowed from pre-Christian winter solstice traditions. If it stayed green in December, it got draped over doorways and hung from rafters. The centerpiece? A boar's head, not just as dinner, but as decoration. Picture this: a roasted pig's head with an apple crammed in its mouth, paraded into the great hall on a silver platter while minstrels sang the boar's head carol. Because nothing says tidings of comfort and joy like a severed pig face judging your life choices. Homes weren't cozy cottages but grand halls echoing with lutes, pipes, and the occasional drunken monk belting hymns off key. The floors were strewn with rushes, and probably a few lost meat pies. The walls draped with tapestries, the air thick with smells of roast goose, spiced wine, and unwashed bodies. Festive. Holly's sharp leaves represented Christ's crown of thorns. Ivy's clinging vines symbolized humanity's dependence on God. Mistletoe? That was the medieval equivalent of tinder, associated with fertility and Norse myths. Often hung in doorways where stolen kisses happened, much to the church's disapproval. Walking into a medieval Christmas meant stepping into a world where sacred symbols mixed with raucous celebration, where evergreen boughs brushed against flickering candles, where roasted meats dripped onto long wooden tables, and where someone was always trying to remember which corner had the mistletoe and which had the chamber pot. In the Middle Ages, Christmas feasting wasn't just eating. It was competitive gluttony with theological justification. For nobility, it was a chance to show off wealth through absurdly extravagant dishes. For peasants, it might be their only meat meal all year. Either way, everyone ate like the plague was coming tomorrow, which, given medieval life, wasn't paranoid, just practical. The star attraction? That boar's head again, but also peacock served in its own feathers. Tastes like chicken, looks like regret, swan glazed with spices, probably tough as armor, and pies so massive they could hide small children, and occasionally did. Look up 4 and 20 blackbirds. There were stews thick enough to stand a spoon in, bread that could double as building material, and subtleties. Edible sculptures of marzipan or sugar shaped like castles, angels, or biblical scenes, often leaning slightly from alcohol consumption. Drinks flowed freely. Wassail, spiced ale served in communal bowls. Hippocras, honeyed wine that warmed you twice. Once going down, once hitting your bloodstream, and enough variations on mulled wine to make a modern bartender weep. These weren't just festive, they were functional. After weeks of Advent fasting, your stomach needed lubrication before handling the goose fat tsunami. But these feasts weren't casual buffets, they were power plays. High-status guests got served first near the fire. Lower ranks got scraps, unless you were at a monastery, where equality meant equally boring food, though even monks broke vegetarian rules for Christmas. Food was central because abundance was rare. Most of the year meant porridge and cabbage. Christmas was when society collectively said, "Screw it, let's get uncomfortably full together." And if one feast wasn't enough, each of the 12 days had its own meal, its own host, and often its own theme. By Epiphany, most celebrants were spiritually uplifted, emotionally drained, and physically bloated, the perfect medieval holiday trifecta. Enter the Lord of Misrule, medieval Christmas's answer to a frat party coordinator with divine permission to turn society upside down. This wasn't just some drunk uncle telling embarrassing stories. It was an official position, often filled by the village fool, a lowly servant, or that one mischievous cleric who somehow hadn't been defrocked yet. His job description? Orchestrate controlled chaos and make everything delightfully inappropriate for 12 straight days. The Lord of Misrule was essentially human holiday madness incarnate. During his temporary reign, he'd preside over mock court sessions where people were tried for ridiculous crimes, like having an ugly hat or stealing sausages. His court was staffed with jesters, musicians, and other agents of mayhem. Think Shakespearean comedy meets college spring break. This was licensed anarchy wrapped in jingle bells and spiced wine. Under his command, social hierarchies didn't just bend, they snapped. Servants gave orders to masters. Students punished teachers. Choir boys dressed as bishops and gave deliberately terrible sermons. It was part carnival, part psychological pressure valve. Medieval people believed that temporarily flipping the social order actually reinforced it long term. You let off steam for 12 days so the other 353 could remain orderly. Even monasteries weren't immune. Some churches elected a boy bishop on St. Nicholas Day, December 6th, who led processions and delivered sermons peppered with intentional mistakes that had congregations howling. This wasn't just for laughs. It symbolized how a child's innocent wisdom might be closer to divine truth. Also, it was hilarious to watch a 12-year-old struggle through Latin liturgy after sneaking communion wine. The Lord of Misrule also greenlit activities that would get you arrested any other time of year. Wild dances where people wore animal masks, drinking games that ended with participants under tables, and costumes that blurred lines between sacred and profane. Nobles dressed as peasants. Women dressed as men. At least one person always showed up as a dancing devil with suspiciously good hip movements. Of course, the church had mixed feelings. Some clergy tried to rein it in, especially when festivities veered toward full-blown debauchery. But most understood that medieval life was brutal, and letting people cut loose within limits prevented larger rebellions. Plus, even bishops appreciated good wassail and the occasional fruitcake hurled in jest. While modern holidays stress family harmony, medieval Christmas thrived on sanctioned discord. The Lord of Misrule didn't just allow mischief, he commanded it. Forget quiet nights by the fire. This was 12 days of organized chaos where laughter drowned out winter's gloom and social tensions evaporated in wine fumes. His reign ended when the season did, but the memories and hangovers lingered until next year. Before radio carols or Spotify playlists, there was medieval caroling, less angelic choir on your doorstep, and more drunken neighbors demanding snacks through song. The term carol originally meant a circle dance with singing, and many Christmas carols began as secular folk songs with lyrics that occasionally made priests blush. Over time, the church sanitized them into pious hymns, but the rowdy roots still showed. Wassailing was the main vehicle for festive extortion. Groups would go door to door singing and offering toasts from a shared bowl of wassail, spiced ale that tasted like liquid Christmas potpourri. In return, they expected food, drink, or coins. Refuse, and they might keep singing louder or improvise verses about your stinginess, essentially becoming the medieval equivalent of Yelp reviewers with better costumes. This wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Nobles prepared feasts for carolers. Peasants saw it as a rare chance to visit their betters and maybe pocket some meat pies. There was even spiritual significance. People believed welcoming carolers brought good luck for the new year. Slamming the door risked more than hurt feelings. You might curse your harvest. The songs themselves ranged from sacred to scandalous. Some honored the nativity. Others praised saints. Many were basically drinking songs with a thin holiday veneer. Popular favorites included Bring Us in Good Ale, self-explanatory, and the Boar's Head Carol, sung while processing with said porcine centerpiece like a meaty trophy. Unlike today's tame caroling, medieval versions often continued well into January, depending on how long the beer lasted. It was equal parts community ritual, mobile party, and low-key shakedown, all set to music that would make modern church ladies clutch their pearls. Before scented candles and electric fireplaces, there was the Yule log, not some dainty cake, but an actual tree trunk dragged into the hall and set ablaze with near religious ceremony. These logs were so massive they often stuck out of the hearth, getting pushed in gradually like some primitive, flaming breadstick of seasonal joy. This wasn't just about warmth. The Yule log had deep pagan roots, believed to ward off evil spirits, predict the future through flame patterns, and guarantee good luck. Its ashes were saved for spring planting or protection against lightning strikes. Medieval logic. If it burns for 12 days, it must be magic. Lighting it was ritualistic. They'd use embers from last year's log, a tradition symbolizing continuity and saving on flint. Lighting it with new fire was bad luck, like shuffling your family's destiny playlist. You wanted that slow, familiar burn. The log itself was chosen carefully, sometimes a whole tree selected and chopped specifically for the occasion. Wealthy households might decorate it with ribbons or even dust it with wine like some oaken deity. It had to last all 12 nights. If it went out early, ominous. Better start praying for your livestock. Gathering around the Yule log was social glue. People drank, told stories, roasted chestnuts, and scared children with tales of what might come down the chimney if they misbehaved, Santa's edgier ancestors. Adults exchanged gossip with wine-fueled enthusiasm while the fire crackled like nature's background music. Though the tradition has mostly vanished, surviving only in cake form, the Yule log symbolized warmth, community, and that magical suspension of normal rules that defines the holidays. It was essentially Netflix's fireplace channel, but with more body odor and higher stakes. Medieval gift-giving would confuse modern shoppers. Presents existed, but they weren't Christmas Day's main event. That honor went to New Year's or Epiphany, January 6th. Forget one big present. Gifts were symbolic rather than extravagant. A noble might gift a falcon or illuminated book. A servant might get gloves or a coin. Children received nuts, fruit, or if someone felt generous, a wooden toy. No gold-plated boxes here. But hey, nothing says, "I love you," like a handful of walnuts. Games, however, were another story. The 12 days were practically invented for rowdy entertainment. Hoodman blind, medieval pin the tail on the donkey with more face-slapping. Hot cockles, blindfolded guessing games ending in laughter or bruises, and wrestling matches that inevitably sent someone into the rushes. Board games had their place too. Chess for nobles, Alkirk, checkers ancestor, for everyone else. All played with ale nearby, which explains why so many game pieces wound up under tables. For theatrical flair, Mummer's Place featured masked performers acting out chaotic dramas mixing death, resurrection, and the occasional flatulent devil. Think Shakespeare meets Jackass. Charades and riddle contests were noble favorites. Losers might have to chug ale, recite embarrassing poetry, or wear a pig snout tied with string, still better than most office Secret Santa gifts. Children reveled in rare freedom to boss adults around or play pranks without punishment. While medieval gifts seem modest today, the spirit of play made the season bright. It was a time when laughter and games stood equal with prayer and roast swan, and usually got more attention. Amidst all the feasting and folly, Christmas still had its sacred heart, the celebration of Christ's birth that made the whole wild 12 days possible. Amidst the drunken wassailing, roasted boar heads, and men in goat costumes declaring themselves kings for a day, there remained the solemn heart of medieval Christmas, the midnight mass on December 25th. At the stroke of midnight, villagers, nobles, and monks alike would bundle against the cold, trudging through snow and mud to attend this candlelit sacred service. Church bells rang across frosted fields and thatched rooftops, their echoes mingling with the crunch of winter footsteps. Inside the church, evergreen garlands intertwined with flickering candles as incense swirled toward rafters. If you were fortunate, a choir chanted Latin hymns. If you were particularly blessed, the choir boys hadn't yet succumbed to stolen communion wine. This was one of 3 masses celebrated that day. The midnight service, symbolizing Christ's eternal birth from the Father, the dawn mass representing his human birth from Mary, and the daylight mass celebrating his spiritual birth in believers' hearts. Triple the theology, triple the time sitting on freezing stone benches. For peasants who rarely entered churches, this was their annual spiritual anchor, a moment of awe between ale-fueled revelries. Churches staged nativity plays with Mary, Joseph, and whatever baby or bread loaf was available. Medieval casting was flexible. These performances aimed for reverence, but often descended into comedy when sheep escaped or someone forgot their line as the angel Gabriel, a tradition that continues in school pageants to this day. In a world where life was brutal and short, Christmas Mass offered transcendence, light piercing winter's darkest hour. It was the solemn counterbalance to 12 days of chaos, the sacred thread holding the season together. That, and perhaps one final round of mulled wine before stumbling home. The Feast of Epiphany on January 6th didn't just mark the Magi's visit. It slammed the door on medieval Christmas with finality. After 12 days of feasting, role reversals, and questionable decisions, society collectively sighed and returned to normal. Mostly, there was still time for one last blowout. Epiphany was nearly as significant as Christmas itself. Churches pulled out all stops. Incense so thick you could taste it, processions with jeweled relics, and blessings of water and homes with sacred chalk. But the real action happened outside the nave. This was Twelfth Night, the year's most raucous celebration where a king and queen of the bean were crowned based on who found the hidden legume in their cake. The lucky winners got to boss people around wearing paper crowns while the rest of court pretended to take orders. A delicious mix of satire and social catharsis. The food? As extravagant as ever. Roast peacock reconstructed in its feathers, spiced wine by the barrel, and the infamous Twelfth Night cake studded with dried fruit and surprises. One unlucky soul would bite into the bean, or pea, and become royalty for the night. Another might break a tooth on the hidden coin. Medieval dentistry be damned. Children sometimes received gifts today, mirroring the Magi's presents. Adults flirted under last-chance mistletoe, while jesters performed skits that would have gotten them whipped in March. By evening's end, decorations came down. The Yule log's ashes were saved for spring planting, and everyone faced the grim reality of winter without holiday buffer. The medieval Christmas season officially ended when the last drunk noble was peeled off the floor and the final meat pie vanished. 12 days of sacred and profane, piety and excess, social order turned delightfully upside down, all packed away like ornaments until next year. But what a glorious mess it had been. Before Christmas trees and Santa Claus, there was Saturnalia, Rome's December festival so debauched it makes Mardi Gras look like a library hour. Held from December 17th to 23rd to honor Saturn, god of agriculture and time. This was ancient Rome's pressure valve, a week when slaves became masters, gambling was mandatory, and dignity went on holiday. The Temple of Saturn in the Forum was ground zero. Priests removed the wool bonds from Saturn's statue, symbolically unleashing the gods and everyone else's wild side. What began as religious rite became empire-wide chaos. Courts closed, wars paused, and senators traded togas for colorful party robes called synthesis. The social order didn't just bend, it snapped like a cheap lyre string. Masters served slaves at feasts. Gambling, strictly controlled any other time, became compulsory. People gave gag gifts like wax turnips or obscene figurines. Roman humor was direct. The streets thrummed with music, dice games, and the occasional public drunk trying to hug a statue. It was glorious, sanctioned madness, and absolutely vital to Roman society. At Saturnalia's heart sat the king of misrule, usually a lowly slave or fool elected to preside over the chaos. His edicts were ridiculous but binding. Sing naked about turnips. Kiss the ugliest senator. For 1 week, Rome's rigid hierarchy dissolved into laughter and wine stains. Then, like Cinderella's carriage, it ended abruptly on December 24th. Slaves returned to work. Senators pretended last week never happened, and Saturn's statue got rewrapped like a problematic Christmas present. Rome's slaves experienced Saturnalia's wildest contradictions. For 7 days, masters and servants swapped roles with straight faces. Nobles cooked meals while slaves lounged, offered critiques like, "This wine's inferior. Did you cheap out again?" and issued demands without fear. Some households elected slave kings who ordered humiliating tasks from their temporary subjects. A senator might have to imitate a chicken while his butler judged the performance. This wasn't just comic relief, it was institutionalized catharsis. By letting oppressed groups vent through ritual, Rome reinforced the social order the other 358 days. The slave who played king on Tuesday would obey on Wednesday without revolt. Mostly. Of course, the illusion had limits. No slave actually believed they'd gained power, but for 1 week, they tasted dignity. And when the festival ended, the wool bonds returned to Saturn's statue, the synthesis robes went back in chests, and Rome's machinery lurched back into motion. The memories of freedom, like the hangovers, faded into routine, but the pressure had been released. For another year, at least. If Saturnalia had an official soundtrack, it would be dice clattering across marble floors and wine cups hitting tables in rhythmic toasts. Gambling, strictly forbidden under Roman law, became not just permitted but practically mandatory during the festival. Senators played dice with street vendors. Housewives bet on knucklebones. Even slaves got to roll and keep their winnings. The drinking matched the gambling in enthusiasm. Wine flowed like Tiber floodwaters, mixed with honey, mulsum, spices, condidum, or just straight from the amphora. Public drunkenness wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. The streets became a blur of singing, stumbling, and the occasional philosophical debate that started profound and ended with someone face down in a plate of olives. Meanwhile, homes and temples dripped with garlands and candles. People wore colorful synthesis robes instead of formal togas, and the usual social scripts flipped. Slaves could insult masters without punishment. Women spoke freely in public, and everyone indulged in 7 days of calculated madness. The poet Catullus famously called Saturnalia the best of days, a sentiment echoed by everyone from wealthy patricians to overworked servants. In a society built on strict hierarchy, this annual pressure release kept the engine running smoothly. The hangovers were brutal, the regrets real, but for 1 week, Rome remembered how to laugh at itself. The undisputed star of Saturnalia was the king of misrule, known also as Saturnalicious Princeps. This lucky commoner, often a slave or low-ranking soldier, was chosen by lot to reign over the festival's chaos. His coronation involved a feathered crown, ceremonial mockery, and absolute power to issue ridiculous decrees for 7 days. Once crowned, the king's word was law, no matter how absurd. Dance with this fish. recite poetry while standing on one foot. Senators and slaves alike had to comply or face public shaming, and worse, exile from the wine supply. Some kings ordered elaborate pranks, like making a general ride backwards on a donkey through the forum while singing nursery rhymes. The position likely evolved from grim ancient roots. Early versions may have involved actual human sacrifice. But by the imperial era, the worst fate awaiting the king was a legendary hangover and some truly embarrassing mosaic evidence. When the festival ended, so did his reign. The crown came off, the jokes stopped, and Rome returned to business as usual. But for 7 glorious days, a nobody could command the mighty, and all of Rome, from plebs to patricians, would bow in drunken laughter. Saturnalia gift-giving would make modern shoppers weep with confusion. Forget carefully wrapped presents. Romans exchanged sigillaria, small tokens ranging from poetic wax tablets to downright bizarre offerings. A noble might gift silver cups to clients. A friend might give pottery lamps or combs. Then there were the joke gifts, wooden phalluses for fertility/luck, wax figurines of grotesque faces, or worst of all, the dreaded gift turnip, basically ancient fruitcake nobody wanted. Children adored Saturnalia. It was their rare chance to gamble, stay up late, and receive toys like clay dolls or miniature weapons. Some parents even gave pet birds or monkeys, because nothing says happy holidays like a screeching macaw in your atrium. The wealthy distributed sportially small cash gifts to dependents, the Roman equivalent of holiday bonuses that probably sparked just as many complaints about stinginess. Gift exchanges happened around December 19th during the festival's peak. The pressure was real. Forget, it's the thought that counts. A cheap gift could end friendships or spark passive-aggressive graffiti. Poet Marshall complained about receiving 3 measly socks from a patron, while wealthy Pliny the Younger bragged about gifting entire vineyards. Some things never change. The gifts weren't just material, they symbolized social bonds. A wax tablet might bear a poem. A lamp could be inscribed with inside jokes. Even that cursed turnip carried meaning, perhaps mocking the recipient's farming skills or just Roman humor at its finest. Unlike modern Christmas's commercial frenzy, Saturnalia gifts were personal, often handmade, and frequently hilarious in ways that would get you canceled today. When Christianity rose, it didn't erase Saturnalia, it absorbed it. Early church fathers faced a dilemma: how to compete with Rome's most popular festival. Their answer? Hijack the date and rebrand the fun. By the 4th century, Christmas landed on December 25th, right after Saturnalia's traditional end, blending Christian theology with familiar traditions. The gift-giving migrated to Epiphany, January 6th. The festive greenery became Christian symbols, holly's thorns now representing Christ's crown. Even the Lord of Misrule found new life in medieval Feast of Fools celebrations where low-ranking clergy temporarily took high-status roles. It was cultural appropriation at its most strategic. Keep the people's beloved customs, but slap a Jesus sticker on them. Some bishops protested. Augustine grumbled about converts still celebrating Saturnalia. But most understood that suppressing popular traditions was futile. Better to baptize them instead. Thus, Saturnalia's DNA survived in Christmas's drunken feasts, role reversals, and that stubborn human urge to party in winter's darkest days, just with more Jesus and, slightly, fewer orgies. As Saturnalia's final embers cooled each December 24th, Rome faced the collective hangover of returning to normalcy. The woolen bonds were retied around Saturn's statue, order officially restored. Synthesis robes went back in chests. Senators pretended they hadn't spent a week dancing naked with slaves. The streets, so recently filled with song and dice games, now echoed only with the sounds of brooms sweeping up olive pits and broken wine cups. For slaves, the transition was especially brutal. The same masters who'd served them roast peacock yesterday now demanded perfect service today. Any lingering resentment had to be buried deep. Rebellion remained deadly, Saturnalia or not. Yet something subtle had shifted. However brief, they'd tasted dignity. However scripted, they'd spoken freely. Those memories didn't vanish with the garlands. Saturnalia's genius lay in its controlled burn. By channeling chaos into ritual, Rome vented social pressure without collapsing. The empire's rigid hierarchy could endure precisely because it bent annually. Modern holidays retain echoes of this. Office parties where interns mock CEOs, New Year's resolutions that last a week, all safety valves for societies that still need to blow off steam. The festival's legacy outlasted Rome itself. Medieval Christmas kept the feasting and role reversals. Renaissance Carnival preserved the masks and mischief. Even today, holiday office parties let secretaries boss managers for an evening before the corporate ladder snaps back into place. Saturnalia proved humans need moments where rules dissolve and laughter reigns, preferably with good wine and someone else cleaning up afterward. In the birthing chambers of medieval Europe, the midwife reigned supreme, a figure both revered and feared, her hands equally skilled at delivering life and, whispered some, hastening death. Unlike today's sterile hospital deliveries, childbirth was a communal female ritual where the midwife commanded like a battlefield general, her authority absolute from the moment labor pains began. Her toolkit blended herbal wisdom with outright superstition, pennyroyal to speed delivery, mugwort to ease pain, and iron nails under the bed to ward off evil spirits. She might chant prayers to Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, while secretly relying on centuries of oral tradition passed from mother to daughter. When complications arose, she performed maneuvers modern OB-GYNs would recognize, turning breech babies by touch, using herbs to stem bleeding, even stitching tears with boiled thread. Yet her position was precarious. A successful birth meant modest payment in coins or chickens. A stillbirth? Suddenly she was suspect. Had she used the wrong herbs? Angered the saints? Worse, was she in league with dark forces? The line between healer and witch was perilously thin, especially when jealous physicians, all male, all university trained, sought to discredit her folk knowledge. In an age before germ theory, her success relied on observation and instinct. She knew fever after delivery often meant death. She recognized when a baby wouldn't fit. She understood that sometimes the brutal choice was saving mother or child, never both. These impossible decisions haunted her, even as villages praised her as a miracle worker. The medieval midwife walked a knife's edge between reverence and ruin, her very skills making her vulnerable to accusations when gods will turn cruel. No medieval woman became a midwife by accident. It was a calling forged through years of brutal apprenticeship, where the classroom was a blood-stained birthing stool and the final exam might involve saving 2 lives with nothing but boiled linen and prayer. Young girls learned the craft by shadowing seasoned midwives, first observing, then assisting, until the day came when they had to take charge while some mother screamed and bled before them. Early training involved menial tasks, boiling water, folding cloths, grinding herbs into paste that smelled like hope and earth. But the real lessons came in the birthing chamber, where the trainee watched how seasoned midwives read bodies like maps. The way a mother's breath hitched before a contraction, how a belly shape hinted at a breech birth, the ominous pallor that signaled hemorrhage before the blood even came. There were no textbooks, only oral traditions passed down like folklore. Pennyroyal tea to hasten labor, shepherd's purse to clot blood, a knife under the bed to frighten away demons. Though whether it worked better on spirits or the mother's panic was debatable. Some midwives kept notebooks of remedies in shaky vernacular, their ink blotted by candle wax and urgency. Others carried everything in memory, their minds as precise as any surgeon's. The first solo birth was a baptism by fire. Without the guiding hand of her mentor, the new midwife had to rely on instinct, massaging a rigid belly to coax contractions, tying off the umbilical cord with threads soaked in wine, not knowing it killed bacteria, only knowing it worked, or worst of all, deciding when to reach inside and turn a baby wedge sideways. Success meant earning the village's trust. Failure? That could mean a corpse, a curse, or worse, a reputation as the woman who brought death instead of life. And yet, for all the terror, there was glory. The first cry of a newborn. The exhausted smile of a mother who lived. The way families whispered, "She has the hands of Saint Margaret," when a midwife walked by. In a world where women had little power, the midwife held life itself in her work-roughened palms, and that was worth every sleepless night, every dangerous journey through storms to some laboring woman's door. The medieval birthing chamber was no place for men. When labor began, husbands were banished to drink with neighbors while the house filled with a jury of women, mothers, sisters, local gossips, all overseen by the midwife, who ruled like a general commanding a battlefield. Windows were sealed against drafts and evil spirits. Herbs smoldered to purify the air. The mother labored on a low stool, or even standing, supported by ropes or the arms of her kin, no lying flat like some helpless patient here. This was female space, sacred and secret. The midwife directed the chorus of women like a conductor. Hold her up, let her squat, rub her back, now push. Some sang hymns or old birthing songs passed through generations. Others told crude jokes to make the mother laugh between pains, all while the midwife watched, waited, and, when the time came, acted with swift precision. Complications turned the chamber into a war zone. A stuck baby might require the midwife to slide her hand inside and gently turn it, her fingers navigating blindly through blood and bone. Bleeding demanded fistfuls of astringent herbs packed into the womb. Stillbirths required whispered psalms and quick baptism before the tiny body cooled. Through it all, the midwife projected calm, even when her own heart raced. Panic was contagious, and death always lurked in the shadows. When all went well, the room erupted in relieved laughter and sips of celebratory wine. When it didn't, the midwife became the bearer of unbearable news, the one who had to say the child won't live, or worse, I can save only one. These were the moments that haunted her, the choices no amount of pennyroyal or prayer could erase. Yet come the next cry for help, she would go again, because someone had to stand between life and the darkness. For all their skill, midwives walked a razor's edge between reverence and suspicion. The church eyed them warily. These women who performed emergency baptisms when priests weren't present, who knew herbs that could end pregnancies as easily as ease them. A successful birth brought gifts of bread or cloth. A string of stillbirths? Suddenly the midwife was being scrutinized for witchcraft. Some clergy demanded midwives swear oaths against using magic, though their definition of magic included any remedy not approved by male physicians. Town records show cases where midwives were fined for charming a baby out with suspicious rhymes or possessing unclean herbs. The same woman praised last year for saving the mayor's grandson might next be accused of cursing a merchant's wife to barrenness. Yet most midwives navigated these dangers with shrewd pragmatism. They crossed themselves conspicuously while grinding herbs. They invoked saints' names during difficult deliveries. They made sure their most potent remedies, like ergot to stop bleeding, were administered where no disapproving priest could see. Survival meant balancing ancient wisdom with the church's ever-shifting rules, all while keeping mothers and babies alive. In an era when women had few career choices beyond marriage or the cloister, midwifery offered rare independence. Successful midwives could amass surprising influence. The right word from a midwife could make or break a young woman's marriage prospects, given what she knew about family fertility. Some became de facto healers for entire communities, treating everything from rashes to broken bones. But the price was steep, always on call, paid in chickens or promises more often than coin, subject to gossip if a birth went wrong. Yet for those who excelled, it was worth every risk. To hold a living child in your hands after hours of struggle, to see relief flood a mother's face. These were the moments that sustained medieval midwives through the blood, the fear, and the sleepless nights. Theirs was a profession of courage and quiet miracles, written in the ink of sweat and amniotic fluid, then promptly forgotten by history. The medieval midwife's pharmacopoeia would make a modern pharmacist simultaneously wince and marvel. Her herb garden was her pharmacy, each plant cultivated not just for flavor, but for its power to ease pain, speed labor, or stop bleeding. She knew pennyroyal could bring on contractions, but too much would kill both mother and child. She understood how ergot, that strange fungus on rye, could stem hemorrhage when boiled properly, but cause gangrene if prepared wrong. Every remedy walked the knife's edge between medicine and poison. Her tools were simple but effective. A birthing stool with a crescent-shaped hole to let gravity aid delivery. Linen threads boiled in wine to tie off umbilical cords, unknowingly sterilizing them. Bronze scoops to clear mucus from newborn throats. And always clean rags. Though clean, in medieval terms meant washed in river water and dried in sunlight. Somehow, it often worked. The midwife also served as emergency priest when needed. If a baby arrived stillborn or dying, she could perform instant baptism, a tremendous responsibility that made the church uneasy. Some carried tiny vials of holy water just for this purpose. Others used ordinary water while whispering the sacred words, trusting God would understand. Either way, it was power the clergy grudgingly allowed because even they couldn't be everywhere at once. When all went well, her payment might be a chicken, a length of wool, or a promise of future favors. When things went wrong, the coins felt heavier, the thanks more strained. Some families paid extra for her silence about difficult births, a daughter's illegitimate child, a husband's too early return from war. The midwife became keeper of secrets as well as lives, her discretion as valuable as her skill. For all their importance, midwives left few traces in official records. Their knowledge lived in oral tradition, their triumphs and tragedies in unmarked graves. Yet without them, medieval Europe's survival would have been impossible. They were the unseen architects of generations, the first hands to touch countless lives, then fade into history's shadows like the candle smoke in a birthing chamber at dawn. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was a brutal lottery where the house always won eventually. Even with a skilled midwife, maternal mortality likely hovered around 20% across a woman's childbearing years. Puerperal fever, hemorrhage, and obstructed labor were constant threats. The wealthy fared slightly better. Castle births had cleaner linens and better nutrition, but no one was truly safe. Women approached childbirth with grim pragmatism. Many wrote wills before their due date. Some wore special amulets of Saint Margaret, who was supposedly swallowed by a dragon and burst out. Medieval logic at its finest. All knew friends or sisters who had died in the process. Yet they had no choice but to press on, pregnancy after pregnancy, hoping this wouldn't be the one that killed them. Babies died even more frequently, perhaps 30% before age 1. Stillbirths were so common they barely merited comment in chronicles. Parents learned not to name children until they survived a month, calling them little stranger or God's maybe instead. Grief was ever present but also compartmentalized. There were always fields to till, meals to cook, other mouths to feed. In this context, the midwife wasn't just a medical practitioner. She was a psychological lifeline. Her calm voice and experienced hands offered the only reassurance in a deadly gamble. When she said push, women pushed. When she said pray, they prayed. And when she fell silent, they knew the outcome before she spoke. The medieval church's relationship with midwives was complicated. On one hand, priests needed them. Someone had to baptize dying newborns after all. On the other, they distrusted these women who operated beyond male control, wielding knowledge the church couldn't regulate. Some theologians fretted that midwives might substitute pagan chants for proper prayers. Others worried they knew too many secrets about who'd slept with whom. Attempts to control midwives were half-hearted at best. Some dioceses required them to swear oaths not to use magic, broadly defined. Others tried to mandate that only old, ugly women could practice, as if youth and beauty somehow corrupted obstetrics. Unsurprisingly, these rules were widely ignored. Communities wanted competent midwives, not pious spinsters. Ironically, the same church that distrusted midwives also venerated Saint Margaret of Antioch as their patron, the dragon-bursting virgin who became the go-to intercessor for women in labor. Churches displayed her images prominently, and midwives often carried small Margaret medals. It was a strange détente, the male clergy controlling the spiritual narrative while the midwives handled the messy reality of birth, blood, and survival. By the late Middle Ages, male physicians began encroaching on midwives' territory, not out of competence. They knew far less about actual childbirth, but because patriarchy abhors a vacuum. Wealthy women sometimes called both midwife and doctor, creating awkward standoffs where the educated man quoted Galen while the illiterate woman actually delivered the baby. The real death knell for medieval midwifery came later, with the witch hunts of the Renaissance. Suddenly, any woman with herbal knowledge was suspect. Midwives, especially those who dealt with contraception or miscarriage, made easy targets. Their centuries of accumulated wisdom became evidence of diabolical pacts in paranoid times. But in their heyday, medieval midwives were the unsung heroes of their communities. They worked without recognition, often without fair pay, always under the shadow of potential disaster. They held life and death in their hands daily, making split-second decisions that would be terrifying even with modern medicine. And through it all, they persisted because someone had to.